When I was a young kid starting to make beats, I couldn't for the life of me get the sound like the 90s. And I wanted really to sound like all of those producers that I was listening to, Q-Tip, DJ Premier, Pete Rock, Havoc. I mean, all of them. I wanted to sound like them, but I could never really sound like them. And there was literally one thing that I learned later on, many, many years after that. They were using drum loops, all right? Especially drum loops sampled from a record, sampled from a live drummer, from a real drummer. That was really the big difference between the type of drums that I was making and what other producers in the States were doing. I couldn't never understand what was happening. Now, of course, I do, and it's obvious that that is the big sound of the 90s. That's one of the biggest things that if you want to sound like the producers from the 90s, you gotta have to do that. You gotta have to sample drum loops, okay? What I was doing is I was taking a snare from a pack, I was taking a kick from another pack, I was taking a hi-hat from another pack, and then you try to make it sound like hip-hop from the 90s. It doesn't really feel like hip-hop from the 90s. That's because it just doesn't feel like it's coming from the same place. It doesn't feel like an actual drummer. And that's what the sound of the 90s is a real drummer playing real drums. So, you know, it's really hard, man. It's really hard for you to get sounds from a sample pack, a snare, a kick, and a hi-hat from different folders, and then make them sound like the 90s drum loops. It's really hard, and most likely you won't be able to do that. Not to say that people from the 90s weren't using samples from sample packs. They might have been, I don't know, but there could be layering snares on top of these other drum loops, you know, putting an extra snare or an extra kick. And there's all sorts of mixing techniques as well that makes it sound a bit more punchier as well, compression, EQing, you know, boosting up the low end on the kicks as well, because a lot of these drum breaks didn't really have a punchy kick. So there's a lot of layering going on as well, but that sound comes from these original, actual people playing the drums that were sampled and then put on these beats. So it's, you know, it's the very infamous drum breaks that a lot of people were using back then and still use today. There's a lot of people still making that sort of sound, and it's obvious once you use that sound. It's really obvious that it sounds from the 90s, right? Using drum loops is a bit easier than to use you know, sounds from a sample pack, because if you don't know what you're doing, then it's much more easy for you to use a drum break, because you only need to chop it and then place it on the grid with a different pattern, you know. And if you're going for sounds from a sample pack, you got to know how to EQ these things, how to catch the groove, how to use the hi-hats to create some swing. You got to mix levels. And if you're just sampling off of a record, a drum loop, you don't have to do much because the drum loop already carries all that groove, all that swing. It is already mixed as well. It has been mixed. And it all sounds like it's coming from the same place. If you're taking samples from a sample pack, a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat, you have to mix them in a way that they feel like they belong together. And these drum loops that come from a record, you don't need to do all that to them. They're practically done for you. They already carry all that mix, all of that swing and groove. You need to add a few extras to it, like maybe boost the kick a little bit, but you don't need to do much to it at all. You know, you just got to chop it and then place it on the grid. So it's much easier to work with drum loops, all right? If you want to sound like the 90s hip hop, one of the things, and probably the most important thing that you need to do to sound like the 90s, is to sample drum loops, okay? That's what you need to be searching for. More than samples, more than the melodics and anything, the real sound of the 90s comes from drum loops, comes from a real human drummer playing the drums. You chop them and then you create your boom bap pattern. And there's a lot of variables that go into the 90s sound, you know, the horns as well. I made a video on that. How you chop your samples as well. There's a lot of stuff that goes in there. The mix as well. The drums need to be louder in the mix for you to get that punch, that really, you know, prominent boom bap kick and snare. You got to know how to mix these things. But if you're not using these drum loops, these drum breaks, you really are not following the essence of what was being done back then in the 90s. Of course, there are a lot of other variables that come into play here, like the type of sampler that was used in the 90s, the SP1200, the 60, the 3000, all of these old samplers. Of course, they, you know, play a major role in the sound of the 90s as well. But in my opinion, that is one of the main things that really distinguishes the sound of the 90s boom bap to today's era of the sample pack sound, which I really prefer, to be honest. And I'm not saying drum loops from these new sample packs, because these new sample packs, drum loops, they carry a different sound, all right? I'm saying go to the essence, go to old records, go dig for some drum loops, okay? On these old records, that's what you should be looking for, all right? That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, man. Go down and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for following the channel. Comment as well. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Go make some beats.